Thank you for joining Behind the Scenes tonight. I am Robin Stafford, and I work in the Office of Engagement with UVA clubs. This month, I am excited to welcome two alumni of UVA's Architecture School, Jonathan Evans and Katie Swenson. I hope you saw their bios in the event description, but I'll mention that as well as being UVA alums, they are also colleagues at Mass Design Group in Boston, with Mass in this case standing for Model of Architecture Serving Society. Mass believes that architecture has a critical role to play in supporting communities to confront history and shape new narratives. In the case of this tribute to Martin Luther and Coretta Scott King called The Embrace, Mass and artist Hank Willis Thomas partnered on a proposal to design a permanent memorial in Boston Common, and they were chosen out of 126 applications. Jonathan is the lead architect for the Memorial Plaza, which also commemorates 65 prominent figures in Boston's civil rights history. Katie, a senior principal with Mass Design, joins us in conversation with Jonathan. Her work explores how critical design practice can and should promote economic and social equity and healthy communities. Please feel free to enter questions in the Q&A box, and we will get to as many as possible. Jonathan and Katie, thank you so much for being here, and I'll turn it over to Katie.
Thank you so much, Robin. We are so glad to be here with you tonight. It's meaningful for us to speak with the UVA alum crew, and I think we may also have some students from the architecture school. So glad you all are here. Jonathan and I were actually at UVA together. He was an undergrad while I was in grad school, but I always love those moments when, as a student, a professor might say to you, look to your right, look to your left. These are the people who you'll be working with in your future. These are the people who will be leading. And Jonathan Evans is one of those people who is leading in the evolution of the design of the built environment. He is a principal in the Mass Boston office, is designing a portfolio of beautiful, healthy, affordable housing, and also the lead architect of The Embrace, the first new memorial on the Boston Common in over 30 years. We're going to hear from him the story of The Embrace tonight and what it means for Boston. But first, I just say to everybody, come visit, come experience The Embrace in person. Feel its warmth, feel its beauty and energy. It's less than a 10-minute walk from the Boston Common to our office, and we have an exhibition up called Making the Embrace, and we'd love to host you. Before I turn it to Jonathan, I'm going to start with a little context. Actually, Jonathan, would you mind turning on some slides?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Here we go, coming to you live from the Boston Common. It's been so exciting to see it in person. So Mass is a 200+ person nonprofit design collective. We're dedicated to issues of human dignity and justice. And we have a portfolio of work that's focused on issues of public memory and memorial, including our work with the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama, to design the National Memorial to Peace and Justice. Sometimes called the Lynching Memorial, it not only honors the lives of over 4,400 victims of lynching, but it helps us understand the thread which connects the racial terror of our past with that of our present. As you enter the memorial, you see these columns bear the names of individuals who were lynched in a given county in the US. It's a powerful experience. Through that process, we met their contemporary artist, Hank Willis Thomas, designer of The Embrace, whose work pictured here called Raise Up is inspired by a 1960s photograph by Ernest Cole of 13 South African miners as they undergo a humiliating group of medical examination in the nude. Raise Up reproduces the workers' raised arms in 3-dimensional bronze. This gesture recalls countless images made in the decades since, reminders of how violence against racialized groups persists in the US criminal justice system. At the opening of the Memorial for Peace and Justice, two moms, Annette Nance Holt and Pamela Bosley, approached us, saying that they needed a memorial to honor the memory of their sons and the thousands like them who are killed every year by senseless gun violence. I know this is a present and painful reminder for the UVA community. Architecture is not just an abstract concept, but really a vehicle for the expression of what and who we value. We partnered again with Hank Willis Thomas on the Gun Violence Memorial Project to create a space of remembrance, a space of grieving, and a space for healing. The sheer scale of the gun violence epidemic, 700 people a week in America, are represented in the 700 bricks in these houses, often reduces victims of gun violence to statistics and ideas of change to empty promises. But this memorial seeks to preserve individual memories and communicate the magnitude of gun violence epidemic in built space, gathering artifacts and housing them individually within bricks in these glass houses. So when we got in touch with Embrace Boston and understood their goals that were emerging to mobilize larger systemic changes at the city, Embrace Boston works at the intersection of arts, culture, community, and research, and aims to dismantle structural racism with the vision of a radically inclusive and equitable Boston, where everyone belongs, and Black people in particular prosper, grounded in joy, love, and well-being. The Embrace Memorial is a critical first step because who, how, and where people are represented has everything to do with honoring inclusion, racial equity, and justice. We know there is a reckoning in America about the role of memorials and monuments have played, and the version and the history of telling one version of history over others. Community groups all over the country are seeking to tell a different story, one which demands a new memorial typology. In other words, perhaps, no more men on horses. The massive statue of Robert E. Lee in Richmond, Virginia was taken down in September of 2021 and moved to the city's Black History Museum and Cultural Center. While the unveiling of Martin Luther King Jr. Birthday weekend, the unveiling of the Embrace over the weekend was honestly thrilling. It was just about the best week I have ever spent in Boston. The emergence after of some racialized, sexualized, and anti-Black comments on social media and covered by some news outlets reminded us too quickly of the work. Embrace Boston says we must name the discourse and lean into dialogue, understanding that we have to find common ground. In a lighter moment, I heard a comedian critiquing the contemporary sculpture and asking, why didn't we put Martin Luther King on a horse? Public art is just that. It's open for conversation and critique. So what was our goal with this memorial? Our goal was love. The majority of monuments and memorials in the US are to war and to violence. So what's in the end more radical than a monument to love? The love between Martin and Coretta, which fueled a movement, and the more meaningful love, their concept of the beloved community, the central lifeblood to the King's work. We were hopeful that we could create something that emotes, something honest, something that confronts you with its humanity, to make you feel something, and more important, to make you do something. It's a beautiful sculpture, and I can't wait for you all to see it in person. But meanwhile, Jonathan, I'll turn it over to you. Congratulations.
Thank you, Katie. Again, it's amazing to be here, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. And yeah, so this project, again, it's really grounded and centered with the idea of love. I mean, that is something that is central to Martin and Coretta and their message and the change they tried to sort of put forth. And again, this quote here, "Love is a powerful force," is from Coretta, and it really is, again, in some ways, a lifeblood of this project. And again, this project starts with Martin and Coretta. They met here in Boston, they fell in love here, and they started their work here. Again, partnering with Hank Willis Thomas, his background in photography was central to us thinking through how we thought about what we wanted this memorial to be. So what you see here on the left is an image of Martin and Coretta. This is after Martin was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And this picture in particular is one in which you can really see their connectedness, the sense that they are sharing in this moment together. They're and really again partners in this work and in this movement. And then so the opportunity here was then to take that picture and find a way to spatialize it, find a way to actually inhabit this love. And that, which you can see there on the right, this becomes a 30,000 pound, 20-foot high, 20-foot 5-foot wide bronze sculpture. So again, the idea that you can actually be embraced by their embrace. And stepping back to the beginning, and this process of sort of form finding, again, really started with this idea of trying to, again, find a way to spatialize their love. Really understand that it is not as much about them as figures as much as it is about trying to understand and focus on their message. So you can see some early inspiration and really kind of leaning into this again that embrace from the Nobel Prize photo, as well as some early iterations thinking through scale, materiality. Again, early on, there was this idea of maybe this thing being a reflective bronze, the idea that really sort of you could see yourself in this piece more literally. I think, as you can see where we ended up with, we ended up with something with more of a warmer patina fit finish that has some glossiness, but it isn't quite as a mirror effect. I like this slide here a lot because what this starts to do is understand really how we're trying to, in some ways, straddle this line in memorials between something that is purely representational and something that is fundamentally wholly abstract. So again, you've got memorials all over the country to King, obviously epitomized by the one in Washington, D.C. Again, many of which really sort of celebrate him as this sort of great man, really honoring his again full figure. Others are purely abstract, and I think what we and with Hank, we really enjoyed this moment of being somewhere in between, straddling this line, understanding in some ways these cues of humanity, but again, it is again about the feeling as much more so than it is seeing them as figures. There were many conversations with Hank around, can we get away with this? Can we take off the heads? And I think that was again really a way to again meet this moment in terms of how we think about what we memorialize, how we make memorials, and how we want to sort of in some ways challenge people to think about art in the public sphere. Just taking a little bit of a behind the scenes look, just some images here on the process. So that the sculpture was in total over 600 pieces of bronze cast together here. So what you see here on the left is an aerial shot of a 3D model. You can see almost the slices for where they kind of began to create the individual castings. Again, this sculpture was fabricated out in Walla Walla, Washington. And what you can see on the right, on the upper right there, that's an image of Hank himself. What you can see them doing there is they're actually scanning his hand as part of recalibrating the scale of the piece and making sure that when the initial sketches and models are scaled up, that it really has that same the ability to emote and have that sort of direct humanity. On the bottom there, you see a beginning of a wax mold that becomes the positive form that a mold then gets poured into. And again, you can see here melting the bronze, starting to fabricate and assemble the pieces. And this memorial became fabricated into 6 larger pieces that were then each shipped via oversized truck from Washington State here to Boston. And this shot here is, again, mid-installation. You can see one of the arms being craned in into Coretta's arm there. Again, the amount of precision required to make this all come together was breathtaking to see. You can see within there the internal steel armature. One of the things that what I kind of loved is that there are all these sort of bolted connections between all these pieces, and so there's actually a guy in there when the piece gets lowered, creating those connections, and there actually is one small little escape hatch for him to leave the memorial, leave the sculpture once he's made his final final connection. So again, quite a sight to see this come together. And I think this is honestly one of my favorite photos of the installation process. One of our filmmakers captured this moment where one of the installers was actually admiring Martin's hand before it was getting framed into place, and you can see him looking at his hand. And I think that's the point. I think that's what we tried to do here, is to really make something that evoked this humanity, that evoked this ability to see yourself in the work, see yourself in them, and that we all have this opportunity here to carry on this mission. So again, that's our hope with this work, that it emotes, that it sort of demands this engagement. As Katie said, it makes you feel. Again, so here are some photos. This one's from a Boston Globe article shortly after the unveiling. But I think, we've seen hugging, we've seen crying, and we've seen a plethora of selfies. I mean, I think this thing actually it's demanding engagement, which is very, very exciting for us to see. And again, you can photos don't actually do it justice. You can get inside this. There's an oculus at the top that really frames views up to the heavens. At the unveiling, Yolanda King, the granddaughter of Martin, called it some as a portal to the heavens. So the idea that this thing is connected to the here and now, it is connected to the sky. I think we're really trying to make a place of significance here through this work. So again, the scale, the feel of this thing, you can actually get around it, is really something that we were excited to put together here. And again, the spontaneous acts of hugging, kids, adults, all ages. It's been exciting. I walk by this every day on the way to the office to sort of see the engagement, the curiosity of the piece. And again, this here. So I'll talk a little bit more about the site design in a second, but one of the big features here is you got the piece coming down the circular granite plaza, framed by two quote walls that are also retaining walls. This one actually features a quote. The only quote on this piece is from Coretta, because again, I think one of the opportunities here is to really amplify her presence and her work. And so again, this quote really spoke in many ways to the call to action of this piece, centering this idea of love, really, for again, their work and what we want to see the role of this memorial doing, and actually trying to keep the conversation going, trying to not just sort of see this as, hey, Martin and Coretta, they are these figures of the past. It is not about them as the figures. It is about their work, their movement that still persists to this day, or should persist to this day. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about kind of grounding this design, this sculpture here in Boston. Again, that was a key focus of our work at Mass, to really, again, we partnered with Hank on iterating through the sculpture, the scale of it, the materiality, but then once that sculpture comes to physical space and has to sit on the site, that's really where we took a lot of ownership in making this thing come together. Boston Common is central to the identity of Boston. It's America's oldest public park. Our opportunity here was to really, in some ways, affirm the presence of this important story within this iconic landscape. This in some ways was reparative work, and in some ways illuminating a hidden story, and also at the same time aspirational to what this city wants to be moving forward. So again, Boston's oldest park, it's hallowed ground. Now, negotiating the common, we wanted to find ways to blend in and respect its historic forms and patterns. We studied the evolution of Boston Common through the years, focusing on how, the sort of typology of its gathering spaces and its sort of memorials. Again, this is a snapshot of some of our diagramming work here. Really, again, there are dozens of memorials within the common. Some of the larger ones are circular nodes with network paths coming to them. And again, this plaza becomes part of that typology. So you can see here, just off the apartment bandstand, we have this circular granite plaza of a similar scale, as the others. Again, coming off of the network of paths radially with paths to the memorial. Again, this is a drone shot before the installation of the sculpture. So you can see actually here the concrete footings. I don't know if you can see where my mouse is, below where the elbows touch down. So again, we wanted to certainly find ways for this to blend in and be of its place. Again, the height of the sculpture is such that it sits just below the tree canopy. The site is sloping, so in some ways the sculpture is nestled within the topography, so you kind of, it both stands out and tries to blend into its place. But at the same time, it wants to stand out and tell its own story, signifying that it's really celebrating in many ways an untold narrative as part of Boston. And again, I think in what we're trying to do with our work is tell stories. You know, I think the opportunity for design to actually speak is a tool that we really try to harness here. And so for us, one of the things here was this idea of the garment of destiny. That's something that King alludes to in his letter from Birmingham jail and other speeches, the idea that we are all interconnected in the single garment of destiny. This idea of this sort of connectedness was something that we took to heart in thinking through how we can actually consider the design of a plaza that actually tries to allude to that. At the same time, we wanted to also tell a story with the idea of how the pavers can actually allude to traditions of African American quilt making. There's quilts are central to African American folklore, and I think there's certainly embedded narratives of hope that are part of the making of these quilts. So I think thinking about how we can make a plaza and aggregate these pavers this became a very big source of our inspiration. And you can kind of see here in this shot how that starts to come together. So we have again 2 different types of granite, 6 different finishes to the stone. Again, we worked with Quora foundry in Madison, Wisconsin, that is probably the best in the country in dealing with complex cubic cut granite. So in some cases, like you see here in the bench in the foreground, we have one piece of granite that is a singular piece, but has 3 or 4 different finishes, flamed, water jet within it. So to get that level of precision, to get that that patterning was very high craft work. And so you can see the plaza pattern again starts under the sculpture and it bleeds out to these circular bench walls and the quilt wall beyond. And you can see here, this is coming from the opposite side here, where you've got the quilt wall, retaining wall. Again, you can see the different finishes of the stone there, kind of as that paving pattern bleeds up onto the wall. And another thing here, I think we were really pleased with the lighting effects within the plaza as well. Again, the embedded LED lights that are really trying to, again, evoke the humanity, really sort of celebrate that and make it feel like it's part of a nice positive part of the public realm in Boston. And so I want to maybe kind of end talking a little bit more about the plaza itself, the Freedom Plaza, and again another sort of narrative that we tried to weave into the design. I think this piece really, again, it's about the sculpture, and I think as we wanted to find ways to ground the sculpture, tell a deeper story, have other narratives within it, we wanted to again use every opportunity we can to connect to the place, connect to Boston, connect to these stories we want to amplify, and do so in a way that again doesn't take attention away from the sculpture itself, but in some ways helps to deepen the story, work together with it. And so again, 1965, Martin led a led a freedom rally from Roxbury to Boston Common. Again, 25,000 people attended, and in some ways was part of this Northern campaign. We wanted to, again, highlight this moment. Again, he spoke at Parkman Bandstand, which is just steps away from where the memorial now stands. And in researching the history of this moment, we were introduced to significant figures in Boston civil rights history. And again, as part of pushing this project deeper and finding a way to honor them as well, we really wanted to put the names of these hidden figures onto the plaza itself. And again, in some ways, that we feel like that's keeping with this the lifeblood of this piece being as much about the message as it is about Martin and Coretta as singular figures, right? So we wanted to honor this beloved community and memorialize names of 65 of these local Boston civil rights heroes in the plaza. And what was exciting in coming up with that idea, our partners Hank and Brace Boston, again, were completely on board and actually took that as an opportunity to create much more deeper community engagement, and actually worked with the city to nominate people that were of this era of civil rights action in Boston to be part of this process and bring them into the process of making this memorial. And so you can sort of see here, it shows up best on these sort of rainy, snowy days, the sort of contrast between these bronze markers embedded within the granite plaza. They're kind of actually arranged in kind of a labyrinth pattern. So again, you can have this action whereby you walk straight to the center of the oculus of the memorial. You can walk around and read the names. There's actually an app that actually provides context to each of these local civil rights heroes as part of Boston's story. This here is actually a shot from, or a few shots from the unveiling ceremony. And, you know, honestly, what I found unbelievably moving at the event was seeing many of these heroes in the flesh, you know, in person, and to actually get their acknowledgement. You know, in some ways, I feel kind of honored that we were able to kind of fill this void and give these people their moment in the sun and honor their contributions to making a better Boston. You know, at the same time, it was a little bit of a reminder that this history, you know, wasn't that long ago. These people, many of these people are still alive, and in many ways, obviously, the work still persists. You know, and so in some ways, we can see here, this is Memphis, April 1968, and then this was last week here in Boston. You know, again, we see the I Am a Man from the sanitation strike, Memphis 68, you know, Tyree in 2023, you know, we have this, we're dealing with the same questions, you know, the reality that the fight persists in some ways to acknowledge the basic humanity of Black people. You know, I think and I say we had, you know, Mass, Hank, and Embrace Boston, we wanted to put out something that was uncompromising into the public, you know, and that I think that this has become in many ways a place to convene and a place to mourn is it's still hard to comprehend. You know, I think that, you know, again, we aspire to make something that really evoked this humanity, and in many ways, again, this Black humanity, and you can see that in, again, the idea that this has become a place to actually be and to actually feel. You can see that in the artifacts left behind. You know, again, you see skateboards. Again, that is obviously a key signal to the individual here that we're talking about, Tyree. And again, so that the fact that this has become in many ways a place to in the public realm to feel. Everything from mourning to hugging is powerful and humbling to have had a part in making this happen. And yeah, so again, with that, I'll kind of try to zoom back out here. And I think really with this project, you know, we tried to answer that call to action and use this memorial as a step towards again making this beloved community, realizing that, you know, the call persists, you know, the dream was deferred. So how do we put something out there that demands action, that makes you feel, and then hopefully also makes you want to do something. So yeah, I think with that, I am happy to
so wonderful, Jonathan.
For questions.
I have a first question. So at the opening, I mean, it was incredible. So many people there, including Mayor Michelle Wu, Governor Maura Healey, members of the King family, of course, the artists and their partners, the fabricators, Ayanna Pressley. I know you had quite a few moments with her, as well as former Governor Deval Patrick, and your dad. So, yeah. Like, what was your favorite part of that first unveiling on Friday?
It was, yeah, no, it was surreal. I think honestly, literally up until the day before, I think I was still very much kind of in the grind of it. And it was hard to, you know, this has been a 5-year project from initial competition through design approvals, design development. You know, this was to make something that in some ways feels this seamless, come together was, you know, required quite a bit of coordination and work. And so, you know, I was literally up until the day before working with the events team to make sure that we had the right permits and yada, yada, yada. So I was very much a like, couldn't see the forest for the trees kind of a thing. But that moment actually, you know, again, everybody there, it was exciting to actually see the effect it had on people. I mean, I think for me, again, I feel like in some ways I've been too close to it. And so to actually see people when they get to there have that, like, you know, holy crap moment was you know, it made you feel, I was excited, and you know, that we were able to actually, I like to think, you know, we got the job done. So it was very humbling and exciting, and you know, felt a lot of pride and having to have been able to make this happen, or be a part of making this happen.
Robin put a question in the chat from Catherine Saunders, asking that have people compared this to the being in Chicago and the idea of viewers being reflected. And I'll ask your opinion on that, Jonathan, but my experience of it was originally you could see in the first renderings, we imagined that it would be reflective. And instead, and maybe you could talk about what was the process and the change of the kind of patina that the project went through. Because my experience of it was, as you're near it, as you approach it, as you feel it, it is a memorial that sort of, I think it kind of, you feel it more than you see it. I mean, you see it, obviously. Yeah. But it somehow kind of penetrates your heart in a way. And I think that instead of seeing your own reflection, you're sort of drawn in to the beauty of this patina and feel almost, I guess, embraced is maybe the word. Have you heard that comparison? And if so, what was the nitty gritty of the process that went from the more reflective material to the warmer material?
Totally. No, that's a great question. And yeah, that was definitely part of the initial inspiration. I might actually do a little digging right now and find an image here that shows some of our earlier sketches. But I think the bean also was definitely something that we had thought of as part of a piece of public art that has that sort of you know, becomes a destination because it becomes iconic. So I think that was definitely a reference that we looked at. And let me reshare my screen. And I don't know if you can see my screen now, but at one point, you know, Hank has made replicas of this or smaller versions of this that are polished, and they feel entirely different. And I would agree with you, Katie, that it's you do literally see yourself, you feel yourself, you see yourself there, and it becomes much more, in my opinion, of an object than an experience. And I think that's in some ways part of the translation as we scaled up. And this is a mock-up, or this is I believe it's about 5 feet tall in total. I think as we thought about how to take this into reality, the practicality of a polished bronze sculpture, you know, it would patina from polished to dull in a matter of days. And so there was a practicality that it actually wouldn't make sense to do that in an exterior environment. And at the same time, so we looked at, okay, we want to have it be, it's going to be bronze, it's going to have a patina on it. And when we thought about that patina, I think it was interesting looking at Boston Common and Boston Public Garden. Again, there are dozens of memorials there, all of which are bronze. We wanted to, again, allude to them, but also have a finish and a patina that was distinct from them. And I think a lot of work went into, between Hank and Walla Walla, the foundry, to kind of getting the chemicals right, to find the right tone that is, yeah, it's warm. It almost does, it does feel human in terms of that sort of that sort of warmth of the patina of the sculpture that we have now. So I think that was definitely intentional to try to find something that again, once we realized that it could not be, and it wouldn't make sense for it to be literally mirror reflective, to make it feel something that is much more experiential and conducive to actually being inviting and warm and welcoming.
I love this photo so much. Jonathan, there's some questions in the chat around kind of the initial, like how this project happened.
Sure.
So Robin mentioned that there was first an open competition. I think there were 126 entries. There were 5 finalists. Can you describe how we submitted with Hank and his team as a partnership, and sort of what's the role of the architect and the sculptor in this kind of partnership and engagement?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, again, so Embrace Boston exists and was founded with this idea that we want to make a memorial to Martin and Coretta in Boston. We need to tell this story. And so they put out this call to make this happen. Again, we submitted, we became part of the 5 finalists that submitted physical designs. And ours was selected. And you could, if you're interested, you could Google and find the other applicants. I mean, I think what I was excited by when we were doing the competition is there was a certain clarity of purpose of our proposal and a clarity of concept around this idea of again, what memorials want to do, how we can think about memorializing both Martin and Coretta, but also their message. That I'd say the others just didn't address as maybe as concisely. So again, it started as a competition, and again, I think Katie, you presented a little earlier our work with Hank on EGI, the National Memorial of Peace and Justice, as well as Gun Violence Memorial. So our office and Hank, we have shared values in terms of how we see the world and how we want to make demonstrate the change we want to see in art and architecture. Again, Hank has a background in photography. He made these initial sketches and he had the concept for this sculpture. So this is, in some ways, this is Hank's running point, and we're just backing him up, or he's the running back and we're the offensive lineman here on that one. Just kind of making sure that we can help him iterate through the design of the sculpture. Again, we helped him think through scale, materiality, proportion, and then also practicality of, okay, how do we then, what is the agenda for actually fitting this into the oldest public park in America? What is the design for the plaza? How do we work through getting this all approved by all of the different bodies that need to actually weigh in and approve this and have input on this? So we, in some ways, we are kind of the boots on the ground and actually help execute on actually making this all happen over the last 5 years. But yeah, again, similar in EJI, Gun Violence Memorial, and other efforts as well. We have a good relationship with Hank. Some of the boundaries are blurred, but this was in some ways we wanted to just find a way to support making this sculpture happen and putting this part of
if you go back to some of the plaza design images, and so the plaza you described, it has this sort of motif of the quilt. And then within the motif of the quilt is another kind of labyrinth motif, which allows people to take in the names of the 65 people, some of whom are still alive and well in Boston and leaders in the community. At what point did the 65 names kind of become a central part of the process, and how did that process go in terms of the kind of community participation that was required to be able to select those people out of so many important people in Boston, of course?
Yeah, no, I think we again, when we kind of started to research the Freedom Rally in 1965, again, we were just struck by how many people in Boston were doing this work. So it wasn't as if Martin just came to Boston and was like, I want to have a rally. Like, there was so much happening here to carry the water and making a better Boston. So many leaders here, James Reed, so many that we felt that if we were going to tell this story in this on the Boston Common, we needed to find a way to honor these people as well. So we brought that to Embrace Boston and said, like, we need to find a way to honor these names. And it's funny because we initially said 20 because we kind of found some of the key founders of the organizers of the march, and they were like, let's do more, how many can we do? And so again, we ended up with a round number of 65 for the 1965 rally. And yeah, they really rallied support around making it a more kind of democratic, community-led process to put out a call for nominations, and then convening a panel to discuss and help actually select the names, which in some ways, it's not just Hank and Mass or Hank, doing this project. It becomes much more of a participatory process and having being a part of making this thing come to be. But yeah, so the names are selected, and then we kind of found a way to randomize the names into this labyrinth. So again, you don't yet have a great picture of it, unfortunately. This is all still so new. So you can see even the orientation of the names changes row by row. So it kind of forces a labyrinth-like snaking through the plaza. So there's this opportunity to take the labyrinth in some ways, disengage from the rest of the world, and kind of go on this journey to reading these names. Yeah, so, and again, that's just something that Embrace Boston, they did a lot of work and actually sort of championing this. You can see they actually gave out medals to all of the heroes and their families. Again, really exciting.
There's a question and comment in the chat from Kim Corey. Love the UVA connections, making us proud. Can you draw some design parallels to the memorial to enslaved laborers here on grounds? I know Mabel Wilson participated on Sunday morning CBS News with you and Hank talking about the role of public memorial, you know, in the sort of larger sphere right now. Do you have thoughts on those connections?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think in all of our memorial work, and probably our work in general, I think we try to be honest, and we try to find and distill the story that needs to be told, and tell it again with in some ways brutal honesty as best we can, with a hope that it makes you feel something. And so again, EJI, the National Memorial of Peace and Justice, again, that became distilled in these markers for every county. I can scroll down to that, and excuse me. Yeah, so again, I think there's an unflinching commitment to the narrative here, and at the same time, the Gun Violence Memorial, again, these houses, these sort of icons of domesticity, becoming transformed to become these museums to lives that are often just not thought about, or sort of dismissed, not dismissed, but just sort of yeah, I mean, dismissed as a statistic, as part of a larger number, but actually seeing the humanity, you know, finding a way to actually make that story emote, I think is something that all three projects try to sort of do, again, and trying to push architecture and design to actually emote. I mean, I think for me personally, the work with Hank is my first time actually working with an artist. You know, more of my background is, I shouldn't say traditional architecture, but you know, it's there isn't as visceral an obligation or an opportunity to make you feel and to challenge you to feel. And so I think that's something that all this work tries to do very, very, very well. And again, I tried to allude before to the other memorial competition entries for the King Memorial, and I think, you know, those were all designs that I don't want to say they were conventional, but they were things we had seen before in terms of how memorials work. And I think what we wanted to do was to do something that challenged you, that forced you to think about things a little differently, that took you out of your comfort zone.
There's a question from Nathaniel James Nelson. I wonder if you can speak to how Mass's philosophy on the role and purpose of memorialization in the built environment has shifted or changed over the many years you've been designing these important memorials. You want to take you've answered that in part. And, you know, one of the things I'll just say while you're thinking about the Gun Violence Memorial Project is that this is not just a piece of, you know, architecture that makes you feel. It's really also it's a participatory experience. You know, I have participated in afternoon engagements in different cities across America, in Boston, in Chicago, and in New York, in particular for me, where family members come and bring these precious, very personal, very precious items with them, and with it a story, and often tears. And, you know, it's a tremendous responsibility actually to accept these precious objects and take care of them. But I think one of the things that's so incredible is, you know, many of us have had the experience sometimes when you lose somebody, when you don't talk about them, they become kind of doubly lost. And this opportunity gives the family members a chance to continue to be somehow connected and have the lives of their loved ones become part of something bigger. So I think this question about what's the participatory role of memorials is one of the many attributes of the work I think we've been able to experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just going to echo maybe what you said at the beginning here. I think really, again, you look at the Robert Lee Memorial, and you know, a generation ago, Daughters of the Confederacy commissioned memorials to, in some ways, tell a story of the America they wanted to see. Right? It's interesting. Amari Price Jeffrey is the director of Embrace Boston. He kind of considers memorials to be like cookies on a computer, right? You know, you accept the cookies, and all of a sudden you're seeing these things everywhere. And so, the idea that we can make the change we want to see in society by actually thinking about whose stories are being told, whose stories are being denied, and how we can be more democratic, honest in terms of the stories that we're kind of championing in the public realm, to again epitomize or sort of show that sort of optimism or that change we want to see. So again, for us, a lot of this work began really with EJI, the National Memorial of Peace and Justice, and so from there, it's really over the last year or two that this work is really starting to come into focus for us as an organization. A lot in the pipeline. I don't know how much of it I can actually share publicly, but again, I think it's really about, again, this reckoning. How can we tell stories that haven't been told in a way that actually can spur action?
Yeah, it turns out, of course, that there are community groups all over the country who have histories that have not been told, and important parts of history that haven't necessarily been seen to be important in the past. I'll leave it on this one, Jonathan, because there's a question in the chat that says,
I thought.
Please talk about the look of a heart from one perspective.
Yeah, that was intentional. And you know, that's a kudos to Hank. I mean, I think the idea of taking a photograph, finding a way to spatialize it, finding a way within that spatialization to think about other kind of signifiers, I think was that was all him. And it's interesting. I don't know if you can see back here, but even Embrace Boston's organizational logo becomes an abstracted version of that heart. So again, I think there's a lot of excitement, momentum about love, and I think the idea that it could be distilled into that, I think is exciting. It's interesting. One of the you know, when we were working with Hank in terms of how this thing sits in the plaza, again, it's nestled down. It's about 3.5 feet below the elevation of the pathway beyond. So we're really nestled into the landscape here. There are 3 different pathways to approach this thing. There was a lot of discussion. Okay, what is the orientation of the piece? Is there a front? And there isn't. And in many ways, he was like, "That's up to you, Mass. You guys figure that out." And then he saw it installed, and he loved it. But what's interesting is that literally directly behind this, there is a memorial that has the Declaration of Independence. And he's like, "Oh man, if shoulda, coulda, woulda made it so that the heart was behind the Declaration of Independence."
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what at the opening, Yolanda King, who is 14
the granddaughter,
years old, the only grandchild of Martin and Coretta Scott King. And wow, did she inherit the Martin gene. She was an incredible spokesperson. She's been a leader in her community. And so she came up on stage and sort of stole the show, honestly, with all those government leaders who I mentioned before. And she called the memorial Love 360. I thought that was absolutely incredible. Yeah. There's a question from Christine Hollins asking about who or what entities funded this project. And I think in answering that, you might also want to talk about what's next for Embrace Boston.
Great question. Yeah. So again, Embrace Boston began with some initial contributions to make this memorial. So Paul English, again, a figure in Boston, sort of put some money behind this idea of making this memorial, establishing Embrace Boston, and then they went out and raised the money to make this happen. So this is all, I mean, this is all privately funded. And I think what's exciting as well is that they see this as the beginning, not the end. So the memorial is part one of the project. You know, they also are hosting semi-annual festivals and symposiums. They have a Juneteenth festival. So they're really trying to, again, create programming that is answering in some ways the call to action, providing opportunities for this continual dialogue and work and convening. And there also is planning for a physical space, a physical building in Roxbury that'll become, again, the sort of the headquarters or institute for this work. And I think one of the things that we're trying to tease out as we're starting to think about the design of that space is what is that kind of connection between the center in Roxbury and the memorial and the common. And I might actually kind of go backwards quickly to tell a quick story. When the memorial was first conceived, many Embrace Boston, before they selected a design team, you know, did a lot of community conversations, community meetings around what the memorial should look like, what are the prompts they should be asking for in the competition, where it should go. And, you know, I think there wasn't a consensus. A lot of people wanted this memorial to Martin and Coretta to be in Roxbury or to be in the South End, where they, you know, again, they met in Boston. King spoke at 12th Baptist Church. They lived in the South End. There was a thought of this memorial to these two people should be in Black Boston. And I at the same time, I think the call here was in some ways to put this story on, in some ways, the front door of Boston Common, in some ways to demand this interaction and demand the acceptance of these narratives, of these people, again, as part of Boston writ large. So, you know, and so I think that's the right way to go. And I think now the question is, how do we also affirm and create a connection between this and what's going to happen in Roxbury? So very long-winded answer to say that the memorial is privately funded, and that there is still an ongoing effort from Embrace Boston to build on the work through programming and a physical space in Roxbury.
A question from Christine from Hollands about the quote from Coretta. Is it attributed to her somewhere on the memorial? So I'm going to read the quote, and then Jonathan, perhaps you can talk to us about how it materialized. Yeah. The quote is, "Love is such a powerful force. It's there for everyone to embrace. That kind of unconditional love for all of humankind. That is the kind of love that impels people to go into the community and to try to change conditions for others, to take risks for what they believe in." How was this quote chosen? Yeah,
I mean, there are so many quotes from Martin and Coretta about love, and I think we were excited to find one from Coretta. So in some ways, having the one quote be from her to him was a nice way to give her just due. And again, I think it also sort of spoke to this call to action, the idea that love is the catalyst to this work. That's a very, very great question about the attribution. I think the simple answer to that is this quote is attributed to Coretta Scott King. We've not been able to firmly confirm that this was said verbatim in this exact word, in this exact verbiage from her. And so, I mean, to be blunt, legally, if we were to put her name there, it would need to say attributed to Coretta Scott King. And that felt a little clunky to us. I think, so again, this memorial is also features an app or digital presence, and the intent there is to put that text attributing it to her and stories around her there on the app. But yeah, it was definitely a tricky, it was a much debated conversation about, do we write in attributed to Coretta Scott King? It just felt a little clunky to us. So in some ways, having no attribution was a way to just, again, talk about the message, but at the same time, you know, to be candid, it does feel like it's an opportunity to not you know, give her credit or just due. So this was a tricky conversation, a tricky decision for us.
How many memorials, Jonathan, are made to couples? I know the Monument Project out of Philadelphia did a large study of all the memorials in the US, or all the memorials that they could kind of harness. And the statistics coming out of it were really sobering. The amount of memorialization to war, to violence, was number one, of course. The amount of memorials for women in the US is exceedingly low. What about for couples? And how did that conversation kind of go about? I see you have one picture up here of the two of them.
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that. And I just know that from the beginning there was an absolute mandate that we needed to find a way. We needed to honor Coretta as Martin's partner in this work, and as someone who carried the work on after his death. So I think that was, and that sort of was the lifeblood in terms of how Hank worked through the scores and images of the kings, right? I think there were plenty of them holding hands, plenty of them, you know, obviously next to each other. But I think this photo of, again, getting the Nobel Peace Prize and the literal embrace, you can even see it in his face. In some ways, the happiness, the relief, became such an inspiration, and in some ways felt like the answer here. So yeah, I mean, I can't say how many there are, but I do know that this was, we definitely took serious the demand to find a way to honor and give Coretta her flowers, if you will.
It's really wonderful. I want to say out loud thank you to Karen Van Langen and Ken Schwartz, deans and professors at UVA who jumped in, and thank you for your kind comments, and to everyone for being here tonight. Really appreciate the larger UVA community coming out to learn about this incredible memorial. And absolutely, the invitation to Boston is open, and come to our office and get a tour of the exhibition, The Making of the Embrace, but don't miss seeing it in person. It's really tremendous. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for sharing everything with us tonight.
No, this has been amazing, and I'm looking at the names and the attendees, and thank you to everybody. Seeing a lot of familiar faces, familiar names, so thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks so much for all your great questions and leading that conversation. And Jonathan loved all of the pictures, and can't wait to get up to Boston. And thank you to everyone who showed up tonight. We will send a link to the recording next week to all of the registrants, and keep an eye out for February's behind the scenes program, which we are loosely calling If UVA Had an Attic, which will be an interesting program as well. Thank you so much. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Night. Thank you. Thank you, Robin.